Welcome to the Curriculum Matters Learning and Advocacy series for our third session here today. Thank you everyone who's joined us this far. If this is your first time, thank you so much for joining us for this Learning and Advocacy series for this session today. My name is Gavin Regans. I'm with Pivot Learning as a program associate. I'm so happy to be here today with you all for this learning. So as a reminder, this Curriculum Matters series is a partnership between Pivot Learning, Partnership for Los Angeles Schools, the Education Trust West, and Californians Together, believing that high quality math instructional materials for each and every student, and that organizations in our individual roles and expertise will allow us to push forward critical work for all California students together and advocate for these better materials and to do this critical work for those students using advocacy. The goals of our group are to improve that equitable access to standards-aligned, high-quality curriculum and instruction for all students, specifically for students of color, low-income students, and English learners, and to uplift the need for equity to be a driving force in the math framework and adopted materials list development process. So we'll be talking again about that list, the framework, and the progress thus far. So jumping into our definition of high quality instructional materials, this is what we'll be referencing, what we've referenced throughout the entire series. When we speak about high quality instructional materials, this is the definition that you can see on this slide. The four descriptors frame that what we as a coalition mean when we know a curriculum or a set of instructional materials is high quality. So as you can see here, standards aligned, state standards aligned, user-friendly, culturally relevant, which is what we'll specifically be zeroing in on today, and then supporting English learners' access to grade level content. We have our special guest, Jen Arberg, who's the Director of Mathematics Leadership from UnboundEd, who will be speaking to us today from the perspective of cultural relevance and speaking to us about how that fits into high quality instructional materials and helping us understand how we're going to advocate for that later on when it comes to the framework and thinking about what that advocacy means.
I am so excited to talk to you about cultural relevance today, specifically in math. So we are going to be talking to you, specifically me, about GLEAM today and culturally relevant instruction. So first thing I would like to talk about is our vision at UnboundEd. So just want to center that. I know that mirrors really closely what Gavin talked about in terms of the work that this organization, all these partnerships have done, really focusing on our students who have been disadvantaged, who have been marginalized, pushed to the side. So we're going to be talking a lot around this idea of grade level, engaging, affirming, and meaningful instruction for all students. So that is our vision at UnboundEd. If you are unfamiliar with us, you can always check out our website. I'll have that at the end. But we believe that this is a way to dismantle systemic racism is by providing culturally relevant instruction for all students. So next slide. What do we even mean when we talk about culturally relevant instruction? So I want to stop because there's a lot of words we hear in the news, in various blogs and articles. You hear culturally relevant instruction, you hear culturally responsive instruction, you hear culturally sustaining instruction, lots of terms. I'm okay if we're talking about relevant, responsive, sustaining, any of those. But when you hear this term, what does that mean for you for instruction to be culturally relevant? Gavin is showing us just the first frame where we already have lots of comments for what it is, isn't, and questions you have. So I did ask before you went into groups for reporters to share a trend or an unanswered question. One thing that we hear a lot is the idea of windows and mirrors, right? That students can see themselves reflected in the work and can see into other cultures as well, which is great. It's that first access point. It takes planning and it takes intention to be culturally relevant with your instruction. You can't just walk in, as much as we love highly aligned curriculum, and we're going to talk about that. That's the first piece to it. But you also can't walk in and just open a book and deliver flawlessly culturally relevant instruction without knowing your students and without being intentional.
I'll say a couple of things. This is Shelley. I think a really important point was made that it's really how you deliver the instruction. And so you can have a wonderful framework, you can have terrific materials, but really in terms of having teachers really feel that they understand what it means and they understand what it looks like is really critically important.
Shelley, it is like you are in my brain and you have looked ahead to slide 17, because yes, the how you deliver is so critical. I'm so glad you said that. And
well, I'll give credit to Marilyn in the group. That was a really important point.
And Marilyn, thank you. Snaps for Shelley and Marilyn. I love it. Gavin, can you move over to the next frame on the Jamboard? Because I love this question that is on frame 2 that said, who is responsible for making sure instruction is culturally relevant? A district, curriculum publishers, school leaders, individual teachers? I feel like my answer to that is yes. All of them are responsible, right? So I think Shelley really highlighted that the teacher's role in that is bringing it to life and how they deliver, but we also need high quality instructional materials. We need a district that supports it and provides professional learning around it, and school leaders that provide structures for that to thrive. So I love that question. I think it's so important. I would also love one more thing I want to highlight. Gavin, if you'll go back to that first frame in terms of what it isn't, I think it's so important when defining something to give non-examples, right? And I love this idea of what it's not, critical race theory. And heaven forbid you use culturally responsive teaching and abbreviate it CRT, because then it's very confusing with critical race theory, right? So I think it's really important when we're talking about this that we understand these are not the same thing. We know critical race theory is in the news a lot. Culturally responsive instruction or teaching is very different. This is affirming, treat everything it is in the first column. And I also love that it's not a checklist and it's not holidays, putting students' names in word problems. If you haven't read Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain, the Retta Hammond, which you can't see because I have my background on, but Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain by Retta Hammond does a great job talking about that surface level of culture, how we have bulletin boards and holidays. That's not what culturally responsive instruction is about. So I love the what it is and what it isn't as well. So we're going to come back to all of these. I won't call out each group because I do want to jump in to what we use at UnboundEd for our definition of culturally responsive instruction. So want to make sure we give credit to Gloria Latson-Billings, the pioneer of culturally responsive instruction, who developed this theory 25 years ago. And I love this quote, argued that the first problem that teachers confront is believing that successful teaching for poor students of color is primarily about what to do. Here's where Shelley was in my brain. Instead, I suggest that the problem is rooted in how we think about the social context, the students, the curriculum, and instruction. So Marilyn and Shelley, you must be fans of Latson-Billings, or else you are just on her wavelength. I love that. So Latson-Billings talks about these 3 pillars, these 3 tenets of culturally responsive or relevant teaching. So we have the academic success, which is high standards for all. If you'll notice, one of the things that someone said on the Jamboard for what it isn't is watered down instruction. Latson-Billings was a big proponent of academic success with high grade level standards. Cultural competence is the second of the 3 pillars, where we're really valuing and integrating the context of students' community, culture, and language. This is what you all talked about, that you have to know your students to be able to do this, right? And then that 3rd pillar, which is that socio-political consciousness, empowering students to really critique norms and institutions that sustain these social inequities. So it's a lot to think about. So what we have done at UnboundEd is we've taken Latson-Billings' work and we've used it to adapt what we call GLEAM instruction. Instruction that is grade level, engaging, affirming, and meaningful. And I also make sure that we're really cognizant of what you called out in the Jamboard, that this isn't a checklist. So this isn't like walking into a classroom and being like, oh, you've got the G, L, E, no A or M. This is not culturally relevant instruction. This is just a way for us to talk about it with educators in kind of some language that might be a little more tangible than talking about socio-political consciousness. All right, so what does GLEAM look like? So you all talked about the intention as well. So for grade level, this is where having that high quality instructional materials is key, because the first thing that is critical is having texts, tasks, and materials that are aligned to college and career standards. So as a math educator for 25 years, I can get on my soapbox that just because you walk into a fourth grade class and they're doing fractions, and fractions is on the pacing guide, we know that that means a lot of things in terms of that, whether or not it is actually being taught at the grade level standard, right? When we think about ELA, literature, identifying themes, citing textual evidence, are we using grade level text? Are fifth graders reading text that is appropriate to them is really key. So that grade level is huge. And that is kind of the first place that I always like to start. Then we talk about engaging, and I'm going to give you all a second just to read engaging and affirming, just those two, E and A, please. Just curious, has anybody ever heard someone use a different definition for engaging when you walked into a classroom? Or I see Allison nodding, Erica nodding. I know I was guilty of this lots of times doing teacher observations, that students were engaged if everyone was quietly working and following along with what the teacher was doing, right? There was kind of a misnomer with engaging and compliant. So I really want to call out that engaging here is persistence in grade level work that builds students' interest, that's actually tied to knowledge and culture without disrupting their beliefs about who they are. I love this definition of engaging. We're honoring and acknowledging students' ethnic, racial, and linguistic identities with affirming, and then meaningful. And I don't know about you, but this is not something I learned in my undergrad teacher ed program, is how to teach third graders to understand and critique dominant cultural norms. And I saw a lot of you on the Jamboard that talked about not maintaining that supremacy of white dominant culture in your classroom. It's really important for our educators themselves to understand that, especially since so much of our teaching force are white women. Our teaching force, we know nationally, does not look like our student population. So do our teachers really understand this culture of white dominant culture in the classrooms? And how are we helping them to help students understand and critique that? And Leah, I want to call out what you said earlier about really understanding the true definition of critical race theory. So important. All right, so when we talk about GLEAM, our hypothesis is when you take the mindset and the planning that is really evident along with high quality instructional materials, then we can lead to improved actions for students and for teachers. And if you click one more time, Gavin, it also aligns with those three pillars of Gloria Ladson Billings: academic success, critical competence, and socio-political consciousness. So what does this look like? Share a time that you have seen grade level misused. Some misconceptions around grade level.
I struggle with the use of it because sometimes I find myself, imagining a world where we're back in a one-room schoolhouse so that everyone's needs are met in the way that they need them to be, only because grade level often is synonymous with you're only allowed to learn these standards at this time because you're this old. It doesn't take into account developmental, cultural, any of those other things.
I love that, Lee. Thank you for sharing that. 7th grade students need to learn how to solve equations this way, which is not what grade level means, right? It means we need to expose them to high quality thinking and reasoning around equations, where we aren't taking all the thought out and giving them tips and tricks and mnemonics, which we know are not setting them up for that higher level thinking. So I love that as a misuse of grade level. It is not one way, it's not procedure, it's not tips, it's not tricks. I love that. Thank you. Let's look at engaging. We talked about this one a little already. Some words that stand out to you from the definition, especially from these bullets. What are some words that are standing out to you? Funds of knowledge, which is what really stands out to me too. What are students bringing into the classroom? And again, how often have our teachers said, no, that's not the way we do subtraction. You have to cross out and regroup this way, rather than, oh, a student is counting on or making benchmark numbers or using mental reasoning, bringing the funds of knowledge that they have and using that. And that also refers back to knowing your students. You said that on the Jamboard earlier. You can't use students' funds of knowledge if you don't know what they are. Formative assessment, empowering students. Notice nothing on here about copying down what the teacher has on the board and being compliant, right? So really looking at this definition of engagement. All right, let's look at affirming. This is about how the teachers deliver instruction, right? Because if I look at my students' racial, cultural, and linguistic identities on the East Coast, versus where yours might be in California, like it's going to vary by classroom. So it's knowing your students is the first step, which is really important. And affirming identity, this is a huge passion of mine as a math educator, because how many times have you ever heard the saying, I'm not a math person? Or you've said, I'm not a math person, right? Affirming math identity for all of our students and helping them see themselves as mathematicians is what drives me to do this work. I have it on a Post-it on my laptop. This is, I want all students to see themselves as mathematicians, and it's the first thing I see every day when I wake up. A little dorky, but I'm going to own it and embrace it. All right, and then our last component of culturally responsive instruction is meaningful. Embody anti-racism, yes. Several of you talked about that. This application, challenging inequities. I love the idea of community-based issues as well. I think about the impact of identity in K-8 mathematics. Danny Martin, if you're familiar with that, and Julia Aguirre, where they talk about a group of students who came to their 8th grade math teacher and were like, yeah, I feel like teachers at the school are racist because the Black students are getting suspended a lot more than the white students. And the teacher was like, you know what, let's look at the statistics. Turned it into a statistics lesson where the students were then able to present to the principal and say, look, here's the data that we have to say. That is a perfect example of a real issue that students brought to a teacher that is meaningful for them, much better than let's analyze 30 sets of irrelevant data and find the standard deviation, right? So really looking at issues that are relevant to students and their community. Grade level, engaging, affirming, and meaningful. But engaging, not compliance. You'll get these slide decks so you can look at these definitions later. And a big part of the learning I really want to stamp is that only when mindset and planning are purposely put into this, grade level, engaging, affirming, and meaningful instruction, do we see the teacher actions and student experience that really represent and exemplify culturally relevant teaching. So that mindset and that planning are really important, along with those high quality instructional materials. So you can visit UnboundEd websites for lots of other guides, blogs, lots of things around culturally relevant instruction. Thank you all for taking a journey down a math GLEAM lane with me. I appreciate it.